Hi, everyone. Welcome to S3 Collective's first webinar titled Rescheduling Cannabis, a Scientific Imperative. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Alina Rodriguez, co-founder and technical director of the S3 Collective. It's my pleasure to serve as your moderator today for today's session. And throughout this webinar, if you think of any questions, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to the questions at the end of the discussion. And before we introduce our panelists, I'm going to hand it off to David Valancourt to kick things off. David, can you introduce the S3 Collective?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alina. It's great to see everybody that's joining live. And for those of you that are watching it after, thank you so much for taking the time. David Valancourt, the co-founder alongside with Alina and chairman of the board of the S3 Collective, also serve as the volunteer vice chair for ASTM's committee D37 on cannabis that I suspect many of you are familiar with. I've been in the industry for about 7 years supporting the industry, and I've definitely lost track of some of the nonprofit time that I've invested in that, whether it's been with the Colorado Science and Policy Working Group, with ASTM, and in other venues. Why was S3 Collective born, and why are we all here today? Really born out of a necessity to fill a major gap. There's been no objective scientific-based organization that's truly bridging the gap between the science and research needed, the standards to provide that guidance to fill in those regulatory voids, and ensure product safety to ultimately inform and impact policy improvements. Myself and nearly 100 others, some of which are here in the audience today, just got back from a week with regulators and industry and other technical experts, academia, et cetera, at ASTM International's Committee Week. And it's clear this is needed. There's no market in existence where industry has not provided clear data and allowed some level of oversight to provide consumers with the confidence that's needed to ensure that products aren't going to harm them. We know the industry's stretched thin, whether it's between 280E and other challenging marketplace dynamics. The cash needed to do this work doesn't exist like it typically would in other industries. And we know that we've heard time and time again, whether it's been from federal agencies or state agencies, they need more data. Well, what type of data, and how do we bridge that gap to make the data translate into useful policy decisions that can allow us to have that safe, sustainable marketplace? That's what we're here to do. And so I'm so grateful for you all to join us, and look forward to educating you all, and ultimately look forward to any support you all can make so that we can work together as a collective community.
Thanks, David. So I'm going to ask Jahan, Shane, and then Andrew to come on camera and then briefly introduce yourselves.
All right. Hello, I'm Jahan Marku. My PhD was on the pharmacology of cannabinoids and was conducted in the Department of Cell Biology and Anatomy at Temple University. And I've published basic scientific articles and clinical reports, almost all related to cannabis, hemp, and cannabinoids. A lot of my work after the PhD has been focused on efforts to use science to inform standards, classification, and terminology related to cannabis, hemp, and cannabinoids, and I'll keep it short at that.
I'm Shane Pennington. I'm a partner at Porter Wright Morris and Arthur in Washington, D.C., although a lot of the time I'm working remotely from home in Beacon, New York in the Hudson Valley. My background is as a litigator and administrative law expert, specializing in federal administrative law and solving, complex regulatory problems. And so I got into the cannabis space after meeting Dr. Sue Sisley and helping her get her bulk grower license from DEA, and then have moved on to do, a number of different projects in the controlled substances space with many of the folks on this call. And I'm happy to be here.
Hi, guys. I'm Andrew Klein. I'm the co-chair of the cannabis practice at Perkins Coie. We're a 1,200-person law firm based in Seattle, and I work from the Denver office. I've been in cannabis for about 7 years, first as president of NACB and then head of policy for NCIA. Prior to my time in cannabis, I served as a federal prosecutor at the Department of Justice for 14 years, including 6 years in the Civil Rights Division. I also worked for Biden when he was a senator handling crime and drug policy, and had the same role when he was vice president. also spent a little bit of time at the Federal Communications Commission. Thanks for having me.
Thank you all. So everybody knows the connection that David and I have with S3 Collective. We founded it together. So I was going to ask in the same order, Jehan, Shane, and Andrew, what is your relationship to S3 Collective, and how have you contributed to the rescheduling effort so far?
Well, first of all, I've known David for years through ASTM and from doing things like the How to Launch an Industry podcast together, as well as participating in his When Things Go Wrong webinars, which have been very educational. And so we are, we've been involved in the past. I helped to lead the research effort for the scheduling reform document that we published. And now my role is going to be leading those scientific efforts, hopefully with a big group of other people who are interested in the risks and benefits of cannabis and how we make those determinations. And I think, when we do this work, it's not just me doing it. I want to let people know that there is a network of physicians and other researchers. And it's fun, I think, working with industry and getting their perspective to draft these scientific arguments.
And my background in connection is a lot of what Jehan said. I haven't formally worked with S3 Collective. This is my first time formally working with them, but certainly on the rescheduling effort more broadly, I've been working with the Coalition for Cannabis Scheduling Reform and other groups and companies and organizations to push the rescheduling process along and try to to optimize the result. And certainly am thrilled to be working with S3 Collective, because a big part of the process, as you'll hear, and especially right now, is getting all the knowledge and expertise kind of rounded up and organized and communicated effectively. And I think that that's really where S3 Collective and this group of experts is going to shine.
In terms of my relationship to the S3 Collective, Alina and I have been collaborating on public policy development for years now, dating back to the Policy Council at NCIA. We drafted and published probably 24 important policy papers in a few years through NCIA. I've known David for a long time, and on the personal side, have been impressed that he's able to paddleboard with a dog on his board. We've been paddleboarding in the mountains of Colorado a couple times. If you've never seen someone paddleboard with a dog on the board, it's pretty impressive. But I also, on the professional side, think that he's absolutely the right person at the right time to get this done. We need national standards prior to interstate commerce, and then the work needs to start in earnest now, even though we're not going to have interstate commerce for some time. And I'm excited and interested to see where David takes this. From my perspective, the collective is the right place to coordinate all the scientific work that lies ahead. As much as I love and respect organizations like CANRA, who are doing amazing work, they cannot do it alone. There's just no way they can do it alone. And I think David will be a good partner for Jillian there. And I hope that people will make sure that David and Alina's efforts are funded. In terms of how I've contributed to the rescheduling effort, I was one of the founding members of the cannabis scheduling reform effort, along with Shane and Adam Goers from Columbia Care and others. We formed that coalition about a month after the president made his announcement. So that was back in November of 23. And
22.
No, I think it was 23, wasn't it? I don't know. Anyway, super lucky and fortunate to be partnered with Shane Pennington. We're leading all the legal and policy work. We wrote the original white paper with Jehan, and Shane laid out a roadmap for the FDA based on the 38 state medical markets, which, from my perspective, the FDA adopted. We've coordinated a bunch of letters, including a recent letter from 12 attorneys general supporting the president's efforts, and we're gearing up to draft the public comments. It's been a bit of a slog, but we're at the 20-yard line. We've got the best team on the field, and I would not bet against us.
Thank you all. So my next question is for Shane. Since you've had, a lot of history with the legal battles and previous tries at rescheduling cannabis, from your perspective, what is historic about the most recent push to reschedule that includes HHS's recommendation of Schedule 3?
That's a great question. I mean, first of all, you have it being instigated by the President of the United States. I mean, that has never happened before for any substance, much less for cannabis. And so that makes this, unprecedented, and it kind of puts the wind at your back in a way that it has never really been the case before when you're pushing for an administrative change to cannabis's scheduling status. The second very important point is that we have HHS actually determining now that cannabis has a currently accepted medical use and treatment in the United States, despite the fact that FDA has not approved cannabis for interstate marketing under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Now, that was a mouthful, but let me unpack it just a little bit to explain why it's historic. Historically, the only way that you could prove that a substance has a currently accepted medical use and treatment in the United States, which is an essential barrier you have to overcome to get a substance out of Schedule 1 into any of the other schedules or descheduled. You had to show either that FDA had approved it for interstate marketing under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, or you had to pass a 5-part DEA made standard that is effectively the same thing as the FDA approval standard. The reason that that's problematic is that cannabis, for those of you who have been living under a rock or just have not, ever looked into cannabis, it's a plant. And so it's an organic material, which means, it doesn't have a repeatable chemistry like, say, aspirin or ibuprofen or something like that, your traditional pharmaceutical drugs. And that puts it at a severe disadvantage trying to go through the regular pharma pathway to FDA approval. In addition to that, even if you could get over the repeatable chemistry barrier, which you can't, but even if you could, the other problem that you have is that it costs, around $1 billion, give or take, to get a substance through the clinical trial process necessary to obtain FDA approval. And the reason that pharmaceutical companies are willing to pay $1 billion up front to get new molecules through that very expensive and arduous process is because they know that if they do succeed in getting it through that process, on the back end, they will be able to recoup all of that money and then some, because they will have market exclusivity and intellectual property rights on the back end. So that is not the case with cannabis, because we already have a booming $40 billion market for cannabis right now. So there's no market exclusivity for something that there's already a market for is a non sequitur. It just doesn't make any sense. Pharma companies know that. That's why they haven't invested in putting cannabis through the FDA process. And so, to sum up, there are practical and just legal barriers, economic and practical barriers to getting cannabis through the ordinary channels to prove currently accepted medical use, which has been effectively like locking cannabis in Schedule 1 and throwing away the key, right? It was just impossible. But with the HHS recommendation, now we have a historic opportunity where HHS has recognized that the use at the intrastate, state regulated level is another path to demonstrating currently accepted medical use and getting cannabis off of Schedule 1.
Thank you. And Andrew, to follow up, can you briefly outline the process for DEA rescheduling and pinpoint where stakeholder engagement is most impactful?
Sure. I think in order to answer this question, I'm going to make two assumptions. One is that DEA gets to Schedule 3, agrees with HHS's recommendation, and gets to Schedule 3. And two is that there's actually a public comment period. There is a scenario by which DEA just issues an order without a public comment period. I tend to think that's highly unlikely. My guess is that they're going to want a transparent process. So, assuming that those two things are true, the DEA will be issuing a draft rule. It could be today. It could be 4 weeks from now. We just don't know. We're waiting with bated breath every morning, waking up and looking at my phone to see whether anything landed in the Federal Register. But that public comment period will last 60 days, and that time period will begin as soon as that draft rule is dropped by the DEA. Everyone will have an opportunity to participate in that part of the process, and I hope that lots of people will participate in that part of the process. My hope is that everyone who is, an organization that's seeing that incremental reform is better than no reform at all, will provide comment in support of the DEA's decision. Again, assuming that we get to Schedule 3. I know that there are folks out there who we would put in sort of a deschedule or bust camp. And, we all want descheduling. We're all hoping for descheduling. We're all hoping that Congress will act and deschedule this plant. But for right now, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about whether we can accept incremental reform through an administrative process that really can't, at the end of the day, deschedule. Or, sort of walk away and say, well, we didn't get everything we wanted, so we're going to take nothing, which would seem to be a crazy solution to me. But so it's super important that DEA hears from those of us, particularly from doctors and scientists who agree that the abuse potential for marijuana is less than other drugs in Schedules 1 and 2, and from doctors and scientists on FDA's finding that there's medical use in the United States as a result of the 38 state medical markets that currently exist. It's going to be important that we highlight any relevant scientific studies that have been released since 2016, and any state level data coming out of those 38 states with medical programs. And I hope that, people who have small businesses will be writing in support as well. It's as important, or maybe even more important, for people who have small businesses to be able to claim deductions, ordinary business deductions, like every other business in the United States is able to deduct, other than the cannabis industry. And then there are two other pieces on the process after that comment period is over. There'll be an opportunity for interested parties to request an administrative law judge or an ALJ hearing. Interested parties are defined as parties that have been aggrieved by the promulgation of the rule. And so, we can expect prohibitionists to make the case that they've been aggrieved, and, cannabis is super addictive and highly dangerous, and all the, arguments that we've seen over the past years that really don't have any basis in law, policy, science, or medicine, but will need to be refuted. The ALJ judge will take into consideration all that evidence that's been presented, both during that hearing and in the public record where comments are filed, and will make a recommendation to the DEA administrator, who will be the ultimate decider. And then the last piece is there's always possibility for litigation. We can't control that. We can't control who might sue. And it's hard to predict what a federal judge will do. But that is, if not a possibility, if not a probability, a possibility.
Thanks for that overview. Jehan, my question for you is, in the documents released by HHS, they cite news sources and databases since the last time the question of rescheduling was raised in 2016. What do you think that says about standards for misuse potential, how federal agencies consider safety?
I think we should all be excited about the methods used to arrive at the scientific and medical conclusions which support moving cannabis out of Schedule 1. Since 2016, many of us contributed to efforts. I know that I worked on a few documents, and we've been arguing for a long time that it just makes rational sense to compare substances to each other to make abuse potential decisions, which then affect policy. And I've been working in this area for a few years, publishing data on how federal agencies collect data and comparing how they track things like adverse events to cannabis and different substances. And back in 2016, we struggled to find the breadth of information that was needed. We have a lot more data today. Maybe some of you saw the headline. There's a 300% increase in research activity. There's more research published since 2016 than probably in the previous 20 years. That is the type of research that we need. And I think the most important thing here is to keep in mind that this is a method that is used that hasn't been used before. Now, if you dig deep, and I encourage you to be like Shane Pennington and just read that multi-100-page document from HHS and the other documents to see how appalling it's been in the past, that how these analyses have been done. And the fact that now they're doing an analysis that in the past they said they couldn't do. We can't compare a schedule, ketamine to cannabis for abuse potential. That sort of analysis just wasn't possible in the past, and now we're seeing that it's possible. So I think it's important to embrace that and back that up, because again, when we talk about relative risk and risk in context, that's the conversation we want to have. And I think especially during the public comment period, we have an opportunity to say, yes, this is a great method of analysis. I think for cannabis and cannabinoids, the more objective and clear the data is on how it's selected and used, the more important it is. If you've ever read a cannabis clinical review on research, and if you've read more than one or two, the first question we'll ask is, how did they select the data? How did they select these studies for the meta-analysis? Usually there's a figure one, inclusion, exclusion criteria, or a method written up. We use these search terms. We had this criteria. This one stays in, this one stays out. Or they show what all available data looks like and how they progress from there. And so I think we're really moving towards a transparent process, a coherent process of making important policy decisions. And I think that so for me, that is the most important step. It's not necessarily the result. It's the method of how they did it that is the most important thing.
Thank you. So now that we've done a little primer on this process and what's going on, I'd like to talk specifically about what S3 Collective is doing in response to potential rescheduling and what makes our approach unique. David.
Yeah, so the way I would summarize it is we're getting science on the record. There's been some great questions popping up. There's one here based on is there concerns that the DEA might opt for Schedule 2? Well, based on that, there is valid concerns. Schedule 2, Schedule 5, Schedule 1. Like, the point is, we need science on the record, and that's just another perfect example as to why. Recognizing that scheduling is about the abuse potential and medical use. As a scientist by education, kind of building off what Jehan was saying, I've learned so much from you, Jehan, doing the HLI episodes where you helped stretch my brain outside of the environmental science and policy world that I was classically trained in, and translating this dearth of research into actionable policy recommendations. It really does no good, and to a large degree, to have all this peer-reviewed literature sitting in libraries and in Elsevier servers if we can't translate that to action for policy and lawmakers. So this is all about getting it on public record as part of that DEA process that, I'm so appreciative for folks like Shane that can help translate what is in the relevant code of federal regulations of how this ends up impacting everything. So again, we're creating that public comment that is scientifically based and objective to get science on the record as part of this process. Because if it's not on the record, then as Andrew was talking about with the administrative law judge review, et cetera, with the aggrieved parties, that information needs to be there on the docket to be potentially refuting any misinformation that comes out. So that's my answer. Pause there.
Andrew, do you have anything to add on why a unified evidence-based response is essential?
Yeah, I mean, we always want to be unified. We also always want to be evidence-based. Sometimes in this industry, we're neither. We need to be unified to demonstrate that there's no daylight between what the industry wants and what the industry is asking for publicly. Historically, we've had some challenges, with different organizations asking for different things. And I think it's been hard for particularly members of Congress to really know like where our priorities lie, and that's been hard. It's important that legislators and regulators understand what we want and why we want it and why we need it. We also, we need that evidence-based response to combat misinformation from our opponents. And because that's the only thing that FDA and DEA will really care about, at the end of the day. They're not the Department of Commerce. They're not motivated by the economics, although the economics are super important, or the optics, even though the optics are super important. They're focused on evidence that they can use to protect the public health. And so let's go give it to them.
Jehan, so we've been talking about S3 Collective's focus on developing this evidence-based response. And as a renowned endocannabinoid expert and researcher, can you tell us a little bit about what you intend to do to help with this effort?
So I think we have to do some of what we've already done, which is look at available evidence. So another round of gathering information. This time we're gearing up for something a little bit more, I think, aggressive, because we have to respond to oppositional statements. We have to respond to groups who will be cherry picking information, which is not necessarily scientific, versus us suggesting a method of how to look at this information and sharing examples. So compiling a lot of the research that has been published, especially looking at the citations used from the unredacted HHS report, and really understanding those groups of citations and what information they're using, and starting to think about what information they didn't use, and think about weaknesses that could undermine the basis of those conclusions that the HHS and FDA came to. Like, where are those weaknesses? Because we might want to find things that have been overlooked, or they're just, they ran out of space after the 252nd page to include that data or specific arguments. So I think we have to conduct that evaluation, draft responses to those potential weaknesses, and also prepare what we anticipate to be our submission to public comments. And this is going to involve a team effort, much like it has in the past. We need clinicians, we need people with expertise, we need researchers, chemists in this space to come together and help to look at information. There are lots of perspectives that people with different backgrounds can bring to help this. We need time, we need resources, and especially we need data that was not included, or at least to know why certain data wasn't included. We have various things that are constantly ongoing. If you are interested in being part of collecting data right now, or contributing to these analytical efforts, or for looking at oppositional statements and coming up with responses, let us know. I mean, we are having those meetings. So I think that's, again, to remind everyone, this is a team effort. We need more people who are passionate about the health and risk. And actually, I think, another aspect to consider as well is we're trying to bring together people who don't necessarily agree with all the health benefits of cannabis. Let's say you think cannabis is great for the cardiovascular system, and another person thinks it's terrible for the cardiovascular system. We need to bring those people together to understand the strengths and weaknesses of those arguments, of the potential risks and benefits. And I think that's where the real power in our submission will be, is in balancing those discussions about the benefits and risks with objective ways of looking at the data.
Thanks, Jehan. So Shane, based on what Jehan just shared, why do you think it's important for our listeners to contribute to S3's Collective's efforts?
Well, we have a mountain of evidence to get through. I mean, the focus on post-2015 studies brings in, an untold amount of data and studies, and we need experts who can put their own personal views after having experience on the ground with cannabis regulation in the states now, because that's relevant under HHS's standard. We need to get as many of them as possible. I mean, we need to flood the zone. You know what I mean? HHS, if you do read its 252-page analysis, that sounds like a very intimidating tome, and it is, but it's very positive. And they say, there's all this data, there's all this evidence, these studies show this compared to these other substances, et cetera, and they draw a lot of positive inferences. But there are also a lot of hedging statements, and a lot of times where HHS throughout the document is saying, we did what we could with the data we had. We found the data that we could get our hands on, but we need more, right? We would like to have more. The data is imperfect. We weren't able to suss out every bit of this. And I think every time they say something like that in the recommendation, it's our job to run it down, tie it up with a bow, and serve it up on a silver platter so that, DEA has no choice but to accept the recommendation. And more importantly, the law clerks and judges who might be, sort of looking at this down the line will see that it's, an overwhelming unanimous chorus of evidence and data. And getting that, we have the best experts that you could get, I think. Like Andrew said, I think it was Andrew, whoever it was, we have the A team. But the A team, can only do the work of the number of humans you have, and you have to bring in more people to go through these studies. Which ones are relevant? What do they say? Organize the data, and then put it all on paper. And this is going to be an enormous amount of work, and we're going to have to do it in a 60-day comment period. And so the bottom line is, what you're trying to do is move a boulder that has never moved an inch up over the mountain, right? And we've got it 2/3 of the way there, but we need to push it over the top. And if we don't do it now, it's very unlikely that we're going to get another chance like this, in the foreseeable future. And so it really is a historic moment with a lot of work to be done and a lot of reason to believe that if we do the work, we can get it done and make history. And, that is the reason that we need the resources, is just to do things. Every bit of what we're going to be working on will help everyone, every stakeholder. Really, all the things that we seem to disagree about sometimes, if you get down to it, none of that really matters at this point. We all will benefit from having 280E relief. We all will benefit from guidelines from the Sentencing Commission reducing. We all will benefit from capitalizing on HHS's recommendation of currently accepted medical use. And if we don't do this now, when we've got the president and the leading science and health agency in the world backing us, I'm not sure when we're going to do it. So it really is kind of a call to action.
Thank you. And David, what do you think about S3 Collective's unique position to lead this comment submission?
Yeah, I mean, I know Jehan, at least on the floor here, is the one person that's gone through all the way to the PhD and has done a dissertation, not just a master's thesis. For anybody in the audience that has either gone through advanced degree or has a friend or loved one that is a stressful, arduous project. And this is akin to doing like 30 dissertations in a fifth of the time that the average grad student gets to do it. So, when you read that 254-page report that the FDA put together, that was a team of people that combed through the data. That's a team of people that's responsible for reviewing the hundreds of, clinical investigational new drug applications, et cetera, for botanical products. So they come in with that expertise. We're so grateful to have Jehan and a team behind him with Alina and others that understand and have been working on this to develop this important public comment response. We're a 501c3, we're science and evidence-based, and we've been really working closely with federal and state agencies. We've built that relationship over the last several years. Folks may have seen me on ASTM and US Pharmacopoeia's workshop. We did 2 of those where we brought global regulators from Germany, from Brazil, from Thailand, from Australia, together to discuss medical cannabis in a public forum for the first time ever. So we've been working towards this for quite a while, and we've got that global perspective to apply here in the United States where we need this science on the record the most. And so ultimately, as I think Shahan just said, like, we're all on the same page here. We're all on the same team. We want access to safe products. There's how many Pew and other polls that support the demand for this. Regulators, when we talk to them, they're largely in the same position. They're struggling. They don't have the resources. They don't have the ability to collect all this evidence and put together a consistent and logical framework that is best in class, that's not overly burdensome. This moves the needle and gets us closer to a framework where folks have consistent access to trusted medicine. There's so many more rabbit holes that I think we could all go down about why this is so critical. And I know there's a lot of concerns that we won't be able to address today based on, misinformation and just the complex nature of it that I think Shane spends all of his extra time. I'm pretty sure he doesn't sleep trying to combat and educate and translate the CSA and why this is not anything but like the greatest thing to happen for the industry. So yeah, I'll pause there. Thank you.
And Andrew, as part of our collective of experts, how do you feel your role amplifies the impact of ESRI Collective's initiative regarding this rescheduling process? Oh, I can't hear you.
That was because I was on
There we
mute.
go.
Rookie move. You know, I really do. I said it earlier, and I really do firmly believe we've got the best team on the field. For those of you who don't know, you know, Shane has 3 federal clerkships under his belt. There's no one on the planet other than maybe Matt Zorn who knows the CSA better than Shane. Alina is, you know, I've said this publicly 1,000 times, and I'm sure she's going to bristle when I say it again, but she's, you know, probably the smartest person in this industry. On the science side, Jehan and I worked together on this paper, and his medical contributions to our white paper were invaluable. And I've got a ton of policy experience in the cannabis industry and outside of the cannabis industry that, you know, sometimes it takes someone to take legal speak or medical speak and turn it into language that people can understand. And so I just don't see that anyone putting a team on the field that is better equipped. But, you know, unfortunately, people do need to get paid for their work, and the doctors and scientists. Shane and I, you know, will work our asses off. We probably won't sleep much for 60 days, but we will not be able to do an adequate job without support from doctors and scientists who can really dig in a way that we just can't as lawyers.
So I'll see if Shane and Jehan have any concluding remarks.
I mean, I want to say what Andrew wouldn't say, and what an invaluable resource he is. And, you know, it's his years in DOJ, it's his years as a prosecutor, knowing how this stuff works on the inside. It's his connections over years of public service and his expertise at being in the cannabis industry at the very tip of the spear for a very long time. It's the work, frankly, that he did, you know, in the civil rights context when he was in the government that I think, you know, people don't give him enough credit for. And, you know, he really knows what he's talking about, not just how to communicate it in a professional way, in a very, very effective way, but also, you know, who to communicate it to. You know, just talking to him and kind of have becoming pretty close friends with him over the years now. You know, anytime there's a problem or something that comes up, Andrews knows the person who knows the answer if he doesn't know the answer. You know what I mean? And he knows who to call, and he can get through to them. And you need people like that on the team. And he is really our go-to guy on so much. And if we end up in an administrative, you know, an ALJ hearing, for example, against a very well-prepared opposition, there's absolutely no one better to be running the show in that context than Andrew Klein. And, you know, I just don't think he's going to toot his own horn in that way, but he is absolutely essential to the effort here, and deserves a lot of credit for getting us where we are right now.
Thank you, Shane. Appreciate that.
I can just add to that because you know, I think the public service component is really important that you touched on there, Shane. Like Andrew, as I know we've gotten to, you've been wowed by my ability to balance a dog on the paddleboard. You know, I've really gotten to know you as well, and you come from a career of public service, whether it's been leading nonprofits or actual federal government employee, and that's thankless work. I have a lot of friends that work in the public service. They don't do it for the money. They don't do it for the notoriety. You're usually the least liked entity or individual because of the bureaucracy that you have to work within. But you are in it for all those reasons, and it's truly inspiring. And that's part of why I'm so grateful to have this team here. So I think that's important for us to all even just keep in mind as we think about, you know, our interactions with regulators, whether it's federal or state, that like we're all in this together, and we have our lens and our biases to bring to the table, but it's through this objective process that we can really move the needle and unite. So
Thanks,
Thanks,
David. All right, Jehan, do you have any concluding remarks?
I would just echo what everyone else said. This has been so far a team effort, and we all continue to invest our times into this and our resources. And I think it's been great working with Andrew, Shane, David, and Alina. It's really been amazing. When I send them an 80 to 100 page document and they can help me get it down to 20 pages of something that the average person can understand, it really takes a good team to be able to extract scientific information into something that can influence policy. And that's a rare chemical reaction, as they say.
Thanks, Jehan. So David, back to you in conclusion. So we talked about this, very significant shift in our industry, and with our collective expertise, why do you think S3 Collective is ready to lead this charge?
Yeah, and so I know we're gonna get to some. We've got, holy crap, we've got almost 20 questions in the Q&A. So I'm gonna make this quick so we can get through the audience's amazing questions. Look, I've been in this for 7 years, 5 years running a small consulting firm where I've been able to pull in folks like Alina Rodriguez and be able to spend time working with Jehan on thought leadership with How to Launch an Industry. I got to know Shane and Andrew and some incredible global leaders that are really passionate and brilliant. I always try to be the least far from the smartest person in the room at all times. And I've done that here again today, and this is just incredible. This I truly believe as well, as everybody is supported. There's no better organization positioned than us to lead that. Look at we've got an incredible board of directors that believes in us and has come on to support us. And we need your help. Ultimately, we can't do this alone. I'm reminded of Holly Johnson from APA, who is amazing, Chief Science Officer, who said at the end of one of our big events we did, call a scientist. When you need help, call a scientist. And guess what? Those scientists need to get paid as well. So let's pay them what they're worth. And that's what this is focused on doing. So whether it's $10, $100 or more, anything that you can provide for support, we greatly appreciate it. On our website, which I'll put in the chat, you can go to s3collective.org. The donate button is right on the top. It's really easy. It's a tax-deductible donation. If you have other folks that might be interested in supporting this cause, please send them that information or reach out to us directly if you want to do something more substantial. We are grateful for this truly grassroots effort. It's a top-down, bottom-up approach. We need everybody because ultimately, right, this allows us to bring these experts and technical writers together and provide a strategic advantage. This complements whether it's regulators, whether it's trade associations. There's a piece that everybody can play, and if you need help filing your own public comment and have contributions that you think you can provide, that's part of the support we're able to provide as part of that public service, but we can't do it without your support and financial donations. So I appreciate you all for considering that and supporting us in any way you can. And with that, I think I'll pass it back to you, Alina. Put the link in there and we'll get to some great Q&A.
All right, so I'm gonna ask a couple questions to Jehan first. So Jehan, when looking at the available data, are we looking at global data or just data related to the United States?
The answer is both. We are looking at, obviously, you have a bigger data pool of regular cannabis users to get data from if you look globally. So I think that there's a lot of data we can use. We have to be careful about how we want to filter that. And I think those are some of the questions: is what are the standards that will be applied across the board on the data to include it? But yeah, we're open to looking at all of the data that's available to help make an informed decision.
Thank you. And another question, would a comprehensive public survey on cannabis from professionals and patients be helpful?
Absolutely. And I think it comes down to, it doesn't have to be complex, it could be 10 or 12 questions, but it has to be done quickly and efficiently. And again, happy to discuss those methods. I know David's probably going to send around a follow-up email, or there should be information about how to get involved. Yes, let's talk about that. Let's come up with a plan on how to administer that efficiently and make sure it's not duplicating an effort that might actually already be underway with tracking experiences from users. So definitely open to that discussion and seeing how it aligns or could contribute to current efforts that are ongoing.
Thank you. All right, so we do have a few questions that probably our lawyers here can answer, but some related to, should we be worried that the DEA might opt for Schedule 2? How does the single convention on narcotics play into this? Is that related?
I guess I'll take those. So the second one, I think I'm going to open a law school course to the public, and you can take it, and it will be probably a year long, and there will be a very scary final exam at the end because it's a very complicated question, but I'll try to sum up an answer. The first one, yeah, I mean, we should be concerned. Historically, DEA has not been a fan of cannabis, and the idea of them moving it to Schedule 3, I'm sure it's going to be overcoming some internal opposition. And when I say that we should be worried, I mean, we should be worried in the sense that we should do absolutely everything we can to slam the door on Schedule 1 and 2 forever right now. What I don't mean is that it's impossible, or that we should be worried that no matter what we do, we can't overcome those risks. I think we can. It's about how do we respond and what do we do right now. If we do what we can do with the team that we have, we can, I think, get to Schedule 3 and then beyond. If we drop the ball right now at the goal line, I'm afraid we will take a giant step backwards, because we're not going to get another opportunity like this probably anytime soon, I would imagine. So now onto the treaty issue briefly. The treaty factors in because the United Nations put cannabis on a list of controlled substances under the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs of 1961, and the U.S. passed the Controlled Substances Act, which requires DEA to place a substance that's subject to control under the conventions in the schedule that it deems appropriate to ensure treaty compliance. Historically, though, the precedent surrounding that duty is very mixed. And the closest analog we have is Epidiolex, which, when it was approved by FDA in 2018, HHS recommended the DEA move it to Schedule 5 or deschedule it. DEA said, look, the treaty prevents us from descheduling it because then we wouldn't be able to ensure treaty compliance, but we can put it in Schedule 5 and then impose some other regulatory restrictions on it to ensure treaty compliance. So we know that it can move to Schedule 3 or even 4 or 5, even under the strictest DEA interpretations of the treaty. And there's every reason to believe that we can overcome the treaty barrier. You know, we have lots of positive statements from the State Department recently. I've written about them. You can go find those or ask me and I'll send you the link. And even if DEA were to use the treaty to block Schedule 3 and keep cannabis in Schedules 1 or 2, Matt Zorn and I co-authored a law review article that was published before all this got going, that explains why that provision of the Controlled Substances Act is unconstitutional, and we're prepared to go to the mat on that if we need to. But let's all hope and pray that it doesn't come to that.
Thank you. All right. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on this question. Can we talk about how we think the cannabinoid hemp market plays into rescheduling? Could any cannabinoids derived from hemp be captured in this rescheduling, or will the market continue to live as a parallel, largely unregulated market? And if that's the case, as more and more consumers move to the cannabinoid hemp market, do you think rescheduling will still have an impact?
Well, speaking from, this is why we have to engage in this process, excuse me, and why public comment is so important. How do we define these things? This is not an old issue, derived cannabinoids. I think in the late 1930s and 40s, the first synthetic cannabinoids emerged with extraordinary potency. There's only been more decades of development in methods of derivatizing them. So it's an issue that's not necessarily going away. However, what I think is still up for debate it's not up for debate scientifically. If you ask what THC is a huge group of compounds. There's 4 versions of Delta 9 alone. And let's not talk about how many versions of Delta 8 there are that you still call Delta 8. So there is a ton of cannabinoids out there. So if you want it, I think this is an opportunity to define what those terms mean. Whether or not that will be accepted is another thing, but there is, I think, opportunities for us to define what are cannabinoids and how they're assessed. because we know there's no pharmacological difference. You could call the plant whatever you want, whatever sativa, indica, cannabis, hemp, CBD, THC extracted from it is the same compound, pharmacologically speaking.
And if I could jump in, I just a couple of things to add. I mean, if you read what HHS said, they made very clear that what they were doing with respect to cannabis did not apply. And cannabis here is the term we all use. What they are referring to is marijuana with an H, a very specific term defined in the Controlled Substances Act in contradistinction to hemp, meaning it's cannabis that isn't hemp, and it's actually a little narrower than that. And they were very careful to say, we are talking about non-hemp cannabis. However, they also, so the answer in that sense is no, it won't affect, right? However, they also said that hemp and intoxicating hemp cannabinoids, hemp products, were skewing the data to some degree that they couldn't really isolate. And so part of what we're going to be having to do, or one of our challenges, is trying to figure out, if we can, some way that we can say with scientific, confidence, how that skewing effect was impacting the data, right? And I guess that I say that because you can tell that HHS was very aware of this issue as it wrote, and you can bet that they're going to be aware of it. So is DEA. I mean, if you pay attention to their public statements, they're very aware of, CBD derived Delta 8 and so forth. So everything is interconnected for reasons that Jehan said, but HHS went out of its way to say it was talking about Schedule 1 cannabis for purposes of this administrative process.
Can I just add something, David and Lena? The two are inextricably intertwined because there is a public safety imperative that we are facing. And that is that the state regulated marketplace has testing standards, has packaging and labeling standards, has age verification. The hemp industry, intoxicating hemp products largely have none of that, with some exceptions. And so in order for us to be safe, in order for my 13-year-old to be safe walking to the gas station and not buying, a 300 milligram gummy, we need to be on an equal playing field. And the way to do that right now, in this moment in time, is to support the state regulated industry, fix 280E, get us to a place where we are profitable, and demonstrate that we are safer when we're regulated. And separately but relatedly, there are issues that need to be addressed in the 2024 now, I guess, Farm Bill, related to intoxicating hemp cannabinoids, which in my view should be regulated just like marijuana products are. If they're intoxicating, then children shouldn't be able to buy them. There should be dosage limits. There should be packaging and labeling standards. There should be testing for sure. And so I very much appreciate the question. I think the two are inextricably intertwined. They need to be dealt with at the same time and separately to the extent that that is possible.
And if I could, just to further back up what Shane and Andrew are saying, the HHS report went out of its way to list the instances of adverse events reported in their system, in the National Sentinel system, where you can report effects from any substance, that there were 133 cases describing adverse events for cannabis or marijuana, where it was the sole suspect, the sole substance associated with an adverse event that resulted in a report to the system, which is incredible, right? And the reason why these other products are skewing the data is that there's been hundreds in just like 1 year for one hemp derived product. And if we look at cannabis, it's about 10 a year versus hundreds a year. So when we talk about skewing the data, we have to be really clear about how we're analyzing it, how we're selecting it, how we're defining things for making those scientific arguments. Just to give you an example of the skew, the weight, it's an order of magnitude off.
Yeah, we dealt with this in the vape crisis, where people were conflating vape products that were being manufactured in someone's garage, and someone was using vitamin E acetate, which was coating people's lungs, conflating those products with legal state regulated products which were not causing injury or death. And it was not a fun time period, and we're caught in that same quagmire now.
We're getting towards the end. I'll ask, there's one clarifying question here. Is the DEA the main audience for the public comments, or is it the politicians, or both?
Your primary audience is DEA, and specifically the DEA administrator, possibly a DEA administrative law judge. But of course, anytime you're putting a public facing document out there that is going to be posted to a public docket, is subject to Freedom of Information Act disclosure later, everything you're doing is has a secondary audience of the public, and all political actors, everybody. But primarily, you're writing to the DEA administrator.
All right. I'll ask a final question. If multi-state operators have the most of the available funding for the industry, why would they fund S3 Collective instead of paying their own attorneys to make a submission?
Can I just make a comment about that, David?
Yeah.
I want to make sure everyone understands any monies that S3 Collective is raising are not going to lawyers. They're going to scientists and doctors to support the lawyers' work. Shane and I have a separate engagement. I just want to make sure people understand that.
Yeah, no, thank you for teeing that up, Andrew. Like that's part of the reason why. And two, it's not an either or. I mean, I can go work with just 2 people on something, and the value of that output is significantly diminished compared to having a vast audience and a vast team of experts. So I see it as not an either or. I know lots of MSOs. I've been part of industry trade associations as well, supported them in the past. We need all of the above. So, but what's missing again is that objective, unbiased information. And MSOs, come hang out with us. Like, come learn from us, come take our information. But we can't develop that information for the public good if we don't have that support. So this really I see as the basic foundation, because the other thing that I've seen with MSOs that I've known in the past is they don't have the expertise. They don't have JHUNT. They don't have a team of medical scientists and physicians that have the resources to put together such a framework. And if one does, I would love to hear from you, because we should be talking, but I'm pretty sure you don't exist. So yeah.
All right, we're getting to the top of the hour here. So that was our last question, but I just wanted to thank everybody again for joining us today. This will be available, a recording will be available afterwards. And if you are ready to contribute to our effort, please see the link that David posted in the chat. Our website is s3collective.org. We also have a contact us page if you'd like to get in contact with us. Our email is hello@s3collective.org. So with that, I hope everybody has a great day, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, audience, for attending. This is great. We are going to get kicked off. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody.